welcome to Busch Hall.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Before we get started, I just have a few announcements to make. I just want to remind everyone that Busch Hall is our virtual space for the Busch-Reisinger Museum in order to reimagine art and identity. It is generously supported by our German friends of the Busch-Reisinger Museum, who support so much of what we do here at Harvard, and we're very grateful to them. As we begin today's talk, the Harvard Art Museums acknowledge that Harvard University is located on the traditional and ancestral land of the Massachusetts, the original inhabitants of what is known now as Boston and Cambridge. We pay respect to the people of the Massachusetts tribe, past and present, and honor the land itself that remains sacred to the Massachusetts people. Thank you, Sung, for joining us from Berlin, where it's already evening, and we're really thrilled to have you here today. I'm sure most of our participants and viewers on Busch Hall are familiar with your work, but just to say that you are kind of everywhere right now. I was looking to post where your work was currently on view, and there are shows right here in Cambridge at the MIT List Arts Center, in Berlin at the Neue Berliner Kunstverein, at the Porticus in Frankfurt, I think starting this weekend, and this fall also in Winterthur, a major solo exhibition of your work. And so there are a lot of exciting opportunities for everyone to see an installation of yours, and I hope everyone will take that opportunity after we have a chance to also talk a little bit more about your practice today. So I wanted to start actually, Sung, by we had to come up with a title for this talk, and you were pretty quick to suggest Undeutsch, or un-German. And I was hoping you could just kick us off today by talking about why you wanted to frame our conversation today with that term.
Thank you, Lynette. Thank you for having me. I chose the term because, for one, we have spoken about Fatima El Tayeb, and I actually didn't know that you were commissioning a text by Fatima also for the upcoming catalog of your exhibition that is to open next year. But I stumbled upon Fatima El Tayeb just through actually Undeutsch and her really relevant critique on racism in Europe and specifically in Germany. And I think that has just been something that I have been particularly interested in because I was at I came a day late, but I went to visit a plaque that commemorates Nguyen Van Thu 2 days ago, who was a Vietnamese contract worker that got killed through a racist attack by a German that was also legally classified as a racist manslaughter in 1992. And yes, somehow, because we were in the conversation, I actually, after I went there, I chose the title Undeutsch. I think for one, to think through structural racism in Germany, but also how certain works you have selected for the exhibition next year tie into that.
And your visit to the memorial was prompted by the anniversary of the killing, or I mean, I know obviously I should have said from the outset that a lot of your work does deal with the Vietnamese communities in Germany, and also the history of, in particular, labor migration to the GDR, the German Democratic Republic. But it's interesting to think about how a visit to a memorial, I mean, your work also deals with the ways in which we, remember history, present history, immerse ourselves in history. I'm just curious if you're interested in talking about it, what prompted that visit. And
Yes. So I was asked to hand in sort of actually a proposal for a more permanent memorial, because there has been different memorials that got demolished over time. So for instance, this one is, I think, 2 years old, but a picture I've took also shows that right next to it, on the right, there was a previous one that got sprayed on and destroyed. And before that, there were multiple attempts to have sort of just like a plaque that would sort of, commemorate Nguyen Van Thu. But yeah, they over time have always been demolished or, sprayed
vandalized.
Vandalized, yes. Yeah, but literally, like, taken away. So yes, I think that actually sparked the reason why I went there. But yeah, it's actually quite a famous case, Nguyen Van Thu. And it's also in a very specific place in Berlin-Marzahn, which, historically is known to have a lot of, Vietnamese living there. So yeah, I think within the context of Berlin and Germany, it's fairly known.
And it's interesting too, though, I mean, and just in thinking about how you approach these issues in your own work, I mean, it's, I should say, for those who maybe aren't familiar, I mean, you're really working across a wide range of media. Installations is maybe what first comes to mind, really kind of room-filling spaces. But you've also worked out in the public sphere and with people. In fact, some of the earliest work that you did, I mean, I could see as a kind of monument, right? It was drawing attention in some ways to communities and why they exist the way they do in Berlin today. And I was hoping maybe you could sort of take us back a little bit to, you graduated 2013 from the Hochschule für Bildende Künste in Hamburg. Did you sort of have a sense already at that time, like, this is the sort of direction my work will take? These are many of the themes that I'm interested in, or was that a longer process?
Yeah, I think very early on, I sort of decided that I have a body of work that sort of deals with my own biography and my own history, but then also to really create exhibitions that have nothing to do with sort of my own, background. I mean, or they are at least thematically really going into a completely different direction. For instance, Havana syndrome has very with that, my research around that, or even the newest project in New York, dealing with, essentially fracking, but the research more around certain laws that limit us to access crucial information regarding, trade secret ingredients involved in, for instance, fracking. So I very early on somehow made this distinction. Most of the exhibitions around the, my own background, coming from Vietnam, migrating to Germany with a father who was a contract worker, also in the former East. Somehow I decided to really, a lot of times, show those works in Germany. I haven't really translated, the Harvard Art Museum, which is also a very interesting institution, dealing with specifically, art from the German-speaking region, to show parts of that body of work at the Harvard Art Museum, at the Busch-Reisinger. So I think the way I arrive at my work is somehow, grappling with these different interests and these, different, at times complicated, ways I perceive myself, and the way I kind of want to communicate that. So one of the earliest projects that you mentioned is about the flower shops. Probably, I think that's what I think you're pointing to, right?
Yeah.
The flower shop projects in Berlin subway stations, which I started with Nudong, my friend, she's a fashion designer, a Swedish Vietnamese fashion designer, and we were making something very simple for that project, which is just like a sweater that said in Vietnamese "Truth, Beauty, and Friendship," and we distributed that sort of through the informal economic structure of a flower shop. So you would have to go to the flower shop, and you would sort of have to know that there would even be a sweater available, and you would have to get into a conversation with the flower shop owner in order to receive.
How did people know? I mean, that's...
Oh, so we had actually just a sort of public announcement, sort of a press release, structure where we announced it. We did have opening events where we served Vietnamese coffee and had sort of just invite friends to come. But the idea was to sort of use the infrastructure of the flower shop. And, it started as an informal infrastructure after Germany's reunification, when former Vietnamese contract workers were left without work. And there was sort of, this unwritten, but on state level agreement that if the Vietnamese were able to sustain their own, financial living in Germany, they were in German we call it geduldet, which is like, I don't quite know the English word, but it's not even accepted. It's below acceptance.
Tolerated. Tolerated.
Exactly, they were tolerated in Germany. So flowers were one of those commodities that were really cheap, to buy and to sell, and so former Vietnamese contract workers started just buying flowers and standing close to subway stations for the natural flux of people coming in and out in order to sell their flowers. And so that's how actually those flower shops over the years emerged, that you now even still see in the subway stations throughout Berlin. And we just wanted to sort of made people aware of that history by doing something that is sort of not related, but also that is sort of informal, because we wanted to use this informal structure. It's sort of like, in Germany we call it Schwarzgeld, like money that is not taxed. But so we just distributed those sweaters through that system that also has sort of like a legal gray zone inscribed within the project. And that was one of my earliest projects. And then I, on and off, have worked with my biography and certain histories and, research projects and exhibitions that have dealt with that. And then, as mentioned, I also try and do very different things that I'm interested in that go beyond
I think it's interesting, Sung, that you said you haven't actually shown. I mean, of course, that is the body of work. Although I'm deeply impressed and constantly kind of in awe of the huge time in your projects, like something like the Havana Syndrome. That it's interesting that you mentioned that you haven't actually shown the works that actually deal with that more specific German history, German Vietnamese history outside of Germany. And it's interesting for me because, of course, yes, we're the Busch-Reisinger Museum, but I also think that your work, even though you're dealing with that very specific context and you're using, it's a very archival process. You're doing the research on, what companies were hiring Vietnamese contract workers in the 80s and what they produced and, all these things. But it still has this universal application, right? And then I would say that, most of your work does deal with these bureaucratic systems and the exchange of information and of peoples and, kind of how people sort of end up, literally, squashed, pushed out, pushed through these various systems. And so my hope is also that even if the historical context of the series, and maybe we can talk a little bit more about that series, that will be acquiring a work for the museum and also showing a number of them in the exhibition next year, that it still has a a broader universal relevance for audiences?
Yes, I think that's an interesting question for me, because somehow I'm also very interested in locality, or thinking through, locality and how, art can do that, but also the limitations these things pose. So for instance, when I worked with the Bundesarchiv, about the GDR documents that sort of records the history of Vietnamese contract workers coming to Germany, and
that's the National Archive.
that's a that's a Bundesarchiv. But in the Bundesarchiv, the specific land that I researched in Lichterfelde is specifically dealing with GDR history. And what I did there was I decided to transcribe the documents that I found. So you are allowed to go into the archive. You're also allowed to photograph the documents, but obviously you have to keep a conduct of ethics of the way you work with the documents. And I decided to transcribe the documents, and inherently in the process of transcription, I also thought about, well, I could, translate them into English, and I decided actually not to do that, and to sort of keep, sort of remove from that, which, yeah, I don't have a good answer to that, but I think in that specific incident, I wanted to keep it very local and to keep it very specific and sort of true to the document. And yes, I think the translation into different contexts, I'm just not a curator, so I don't know. I don't have the answer as to how good that works sometimes. Like, for instance, my project in New York specifically deals with fracking in the United States.
Yeah.
That has nothing to do with Germany whatsoever, because we don't have fracking in this way. So yes, I think a lot of times I develop exhibitions, based from the locality of the institution as well.
Right, and I agree. I think that site sort of specificity, to me it's sort of, if we go back to the flower shops, right? It really is, that was a project about Berlin, and it was, specific to an experience that people might have in Berlin and not actually realize, the history of this and why are these sort of flower shops ubiquitous in the subway stations and things. But I was thinking about, right now at the MIT list, you have a work which is, really abstracts out from the documents, which is, the document for the application for asylum to the United States, right? But there you've actually removed the English as well, and just focused on, the forms, the boxes, and as I was looking at those, I was thinking about the very specific ones that are for the German work contract, for the Vietnamese workers. And I thought, well, we look at those documents either way, right? They're materially very different. And we recognize bureaucracy, right? We recognize, you're actually stamping them, right? So even just this sort of bureaucratic language of forms and stamps and pages and pages and pages, right? In order to, acquire citizenship or a residency permit or whatever it may be.
Yeah, I actually for one second want to acknowledge all my friends that I right now in this that
are joining us right now.
Actually,
yes, you can wave. They've been insta hearting you and insta waving.
I just see them coming in and out, which is nice. Yes, so the documents at MIT, I think the documents at MIT are really a new body of work for me. This is actually the first time I have removed all language away from the initial documents. Like the way I started with Haus der Kunst and Zugzwang is to fictionalize the bureaucratic document. So I actually used, the actual document, the application for asylum, and fictionalized it by changing headlines, by changing categories, by removing the nation state altogether. I did keep, the first world and the third world differentiation, but otherwise it's not about a specific nation state. In this specific incident, I was sort of interested in fictionalizing the document. And then with the project at GFCK, Multiboy, it was more about showing certain documents that I thought were really interesting and seen, and they haven't been talked about in a way. I think a lot of times I asked myself what I'm actually providing within an exhibition, like what is my contribution to the conversation or the discussions that are around those topics already. So for instance, if you think about the conversations around Vietnamese contract workers in Germany, a lot of times that is done through the perspective of witnesses of the time, or, you know, personal storytelling. And I was like, okay, this is already out there. What I would be really interested in is to expand that conversation and to talk about it as well, but just from a different perspective, which is an artistic perspective, or one where I'm actually looking more into how the GDR has recorded the history of Vietnamese workers coming to Germany from a bureaucratic perspective. So somehow I thought that's actually a really interesting way to look at that and to add something to the discussion and to the conversations that have already been happening around that specific history. And so the documents that I found in the Bundesarchiv just were so striking to just see. I mean, the documents I'm showing specifically that I'm talking about is a flight list, you know, and the flight list only documents basically the date, the flight number, the route essentially that the Vietnamese contract workers took, you know, to go to a specific VEB. So you would just see an amount. It just says ist and soll. So soll means like X amount of number are supposed to fly in terms of Vietnamese people are supposed to fly that day. And then the amount of people that are actually flown that day to work in that specific factory. So you would just basically have a list of factories, the flight number, the date, and also the person, the Vietnamese person as a number.
Yeah. So that was really the beginning then. I mean, I do think that is, you know, we don't have names, we don't have, you know, where are the people coming from? You know, it really is the kind of boiled down to, you know, the numbers on a list, on a chart. I should add that for those who aren't familiar, the VEB is the Volkseigener Betrieb in German. So that is publicly owned enterprise. And so the well, I can't get into the whole explanation of how the GDR function. In fact, actually, you would be a much better person to explain that to us, Sung. But in short, you know, there was an agreement, 1980, between North Vietnam and the GDR to bring workers, really to do primarily, correct me if I'm wrong, manual labor in industrial centers in the GDR. And that contract then was dissolved with the fall of the wall, Sung?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it was not North Vietnam. It was already the Socialist Republic of
Vietnam.
Yes. Vietnam, but yes, with the GDR, and yes, it was essentially just an agreement because the GDR lacked workers and lacked workforce. So it was not only with Vietnam, it was also with Mozambique and other nations. But specifically in the case of Vietnam, it was that you had basically a VEB, and they would also take only one specific nation. So for instance, you know, you have one VEB and they would only contract Vietnamese contract workers. And that was then, because that also had to do with a specific housing situation, where Vietnamese contract workers were put together basically in Germany we call it a Wohnheim, which is
like a dormitory, I guess.
Yeah, like a housing complex where my dad lived, and I actually lived in one as well. But I came to Germany in 1992, so it was a former, dormitory for Vietnamese contract workers that then just got opened up to all kinds of migrants at the time, but mostly Vietnamese migrants that were coming to Germany.
I saw a picture, Sung, that you included in an exhibition right now at the Neue Berliner Kunstverein of you as a young child. Is that in front of the housing complex where you lived? You're sort of sitting on a wall.
Yeah, I have one sitting on the wall and one actually inside, because it would just tell you a lot about the spatial composition and how much space we had, which is not much. But yes, so inscribed in sort of the way the GDR welcomed, quote unquote, contract workers was already with the idea to segregate them in some way or another, to be like, okay, a lot of times those the housing was close to the factory, also inscribed in the way you were signing the work contract and the way the rules around housing were made was to keep you separate from the German society. The work contract was set up in a way that you are employed for 3 to 4 years, and after that employment you are supposed to leave the country again. So you were not, if you would get pregnant, you would get sent back. Any kind of mingling with Germans is sort of not welcomed, because that could potentially violate your work contract or your ability to work, which is also shift work. So
right.
So privacy was another thing that was very restricted. There, in a lot of those house rules for those dormitories, you were not allowed to have guests from 10 to 5 a.m., for instance, which would obviously also, restrict sexuality and all other things that come with life.
I thought I want to come back to something you said about, that you found yourself asking yourself as an artist, what are you bringing to these conversations, and I think it is important that you were born in 1987. You came to Germany in 1992, right? It was sort of, the official sort of contract was ended, and yet you just described yourself, not only was your father involved with it, but you described yourself literally living in these spaces where the contract workers had lived. And now much of your work is sourcing the literal physical objects that they manufactured and sort of reintroducing those, into, obviously into an art context, but also reintroducing in some ways, the ubiquity of these products, right? Because again, we can't forget the whole driver of all of this was economic, right? It was, as in West Germany as well, right? You mentioned, East Germany needed laborers. So in some ways, I don't know, maybe you could speak to that. I'm trying to tease something out. It's both a kind of layering of history. It's an archival research practice. It's your personal biography. It's, German history, but it's also now, global histories of migration, and all of this is getting layered in what you called recently deconstructed readymades. And I thought, I have to ask her to talk about what that means, because I think I referred to them once as assisted readymades, right? Because that's the sort of art historical lingo around the ready-made. And you said in taking these objects, these VAB objects, you were making deconstructed ready-mades.
I think for me, it is, I kind of want to bring it to attention, I bring it almost to the German consciousness, that a lot of those products that also are infused with a certain nostalgia around the GDR. For instance, the Multiboy, which is a food processor, has the specific design, of its time, and is in many ways also romanticized as this, calky object. And I wanted to instead talk about, because it's hard when you see the product, you don't actually see the labor behind it. So for me, somehow, it was about recontextualizing that and bringing that to a German consciousness. In the same way that my exhibition at NBK right now, that is still up, I think for another 10 days or something, deals with Gehrenseestraße, the building complex where I lived, which used to be a dormitory for Vietnamese contract workers. And I decided to do this project right now because it's actually being demolished by the end of the year. So it's also going to disappear from the city landscape. I mean, it has been a ruin since 2003. So nobody has lived there, but now it has been sold to investors, and they are planning to build Quartier Gernseestraße, which is, a sort of office, shopping, work, life, living complex in its place. And so that history is also going to vanish. And I think for me, it is about bringing that back, or kind of thinking through it again. And I mean, for me, it's also a part of my history that is going to sort of visually disappear from the city landscape. Yeah,
and I think that's so, I think that's what I love about your work is that it can be, highly conceptual. You're looking through, histories also of European art traditions, minimalism, the ready-made, right? Even I saw even Rothko now with some works with sewn fabric. So there's a dialogue happening on that level, but you're also then really not afraid to put in a photograph of yourself as a child, and I think it's not something that necessarily everyone would feel sort of comfortable in with a practice that it has such, the themes that you're raising, right? And their sort of, kind of oppressive quality of a lot of it today, right? You're willing to sort of put yourself in there as well.
Well, it was the first time I've done that. Or no, it's actually not the first time I've done that. I've done it actually in 2020 at Haus der Kunst, but it was the first time that I actually showed the living situation with me and my mom within that complex. And strangely, I had a lot of friends asking me why I decided to leave it outside of the space. It's actually not in the exhibition space.
Oh, it's not. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Well, it is sort of like in front of the exhibition space in the foyer. And yeah, I think some part of me is also insecure about doing that. I think there's some almost like a hesitant, gesture in not putting it in there. So yeah, I think it's something I'm grappling with.
Yeah.
Not a straightforward response. But I think in this specific instance, it also showed something that maybe not a lot of visitors know, how that looks like, or how that concretely was.
I have one more question for you, and it's specific to the work that we are acquiring for the Busch-Reisinger Museum, because it's a part of the Frau Abbey work series that is accompanied by a work contract, and yet it has a very different title than a lot of the works. It's called Untitled Everything or Nothing, and we will include a photo once it's all official on our Instagram. But it's a stool, one of your stainless steel stools, with a woman's uniform hanging on a hook with a little pin that says Fortschritt. And it's called Untitled Everything or Nothing. Mm-hmm. And I kept thinking everything or nothing, to me that kind of said it all. But I thought, would you care to extrapolate on that? Why that title for that particular work?
Well, the whole exhibition was called Everything or Nothing.
Ah, it was.
Yes. And
So it's just one of many.
It's
Do that. Do your research. Yes.
So, yes, I could say a lot about that, but I think it would involve sort of like the whole exhibition. But yeah, I think the woman's suit, it's also an homage to my mom, or I think a lot of my work is actually an homage to my mother. But and the pin is actually from a different VRB. Fortschritt is also, you know, in German the term advancement, but it's actually a VRB Landwirtschaft. Is it for agriculture? So it has to do a lot with. I mean, I'm a family of farmers, so my own history, where my family comes from in Vietnam, we are, you know, we were farmers, and so somehow, you know, obviously the decision of my father to come to Germany to work as a contract worker, but also having these deeper seated histories of being farmers, came to this, you know, it's also like this, you know, this notion of hope to come to Germany and to leave everything behind. So that somehow ties in with the title. I hope that answers the question.
It does, and we have someone commenting on your comment about homage to my mother.
Yeah.
And and I want to maybe wrap up with one thing that you did mention to me, if you don't mind my mentioning it. But you know, we started out by talking about the title for today's conversation as Undeutsch or Un-German, and you told me that you're
in a private
moment.
No, you are allowed to say it. You are allowed
well,
to say it.
well, I just wanted to talk about your name.
Yeah.
We don't have to get into the specifics of it.
No,
but being Sung Tieu in Germany.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm just going to share it now. Basically, I told Lynette that in school I wanted to be called Caroline, because I had this, I can't remember, I think I was 10 or something, and I was tired because my name, you know, is not, I mean, it's written with a D and it's just a different letter in Vietnamese. And so I'm pronounced Sung, but I'm written, it just got, when we went to Germany and I had to get a German passport, you know, that letter turned into a D. So I was forever Dang. And, you know, just called me that. And so I, you know, at some point went to my mother and said, Mom, I want to be called Carolina. And, you know, I want to be, you know, basically have a German name. And because that, you know, that is also a practice that is quite common. In the United States, that's common. In Germany, that's common too. And so, yeah, my mom said no. She said that's not a good idea. So, it never came into fruition. Nobody ever called me Carolina, but there was this wish once, which I also, you know, obviously that is something that you then understand, that you have to sort of like, decolonialize yourself and understand, you know, as a child, you just, want to assimilate so badly, you know, to, you know, in school, you know, that was the desire, and that it takes a lot to uncouple that and work through that, you know, by myself. So, yeah.
Well, but with your mother's support, and I think, I know that's why, you know, I think in some ways it encapsulates so much about, you know, the ideas of what is German, right? And how do we, I mean, even in the lead up to this, you know, do we pronounce your name in the way it is in Germany, right? And, you know, all of these sort of small decisions that are a part of everyday life, you know, for so many people. So I appreciate, even though I sort of forced your hand on it, appreciate your sharing that story, because for me it really yeah, it really shows, you know, also where we are now, maybe, and the kind of consciousness raising that's happening, you know, in art, but also elsewhere. And I think that's also, you know, something I took away from Fatima Al-Tayeb, right? That it actually is about, you know, interdisciplinary, transnational, you know, really coming together, right, in order to make change. And I'm so grateful for you, Sung, and so grateful for your work, and look forward to seeing everything there is to see that you do. Be traveling around Germany trying to catch as much as I can. And yes, I look forward to having your work in the collection of the Busch-Reisinger Museum very, very soon.
And thank you. And thank you to all my friends that joined.
Thank you, everyone, for joining today. And thank you again, Sung. And join us next month for the next Busch Hall. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.